Hello my dear students, my name is N.Gupta and here I am teaching you industrial law. But before going further to your subject, I want to ask you some questions. My question to you all that why we should study industrial law? हमें industrial law क्यों पढ़ना चाहिए? What is the importance of studying industrial law? And how it is helpful in our graduation, or how is it helpful for our future purpose? Some of you maybe think that, oh, this subject, oh, it's so boring, why we should study law, क्योंकि law का नाम देख के ही आप घबरा जाते हैं. So law क्यों पढ़ना चाहिए, और वो भी industrial law? उसमें होता ही क्या है? It's so simple. It's about industry, it's about factory, it's about labor. वो तो हमें सब आता है. So it is good that you all know each and everything of industrial law, और आपको बिल्कुल भी ज़रूरत नहीं है इस बोरिंग से सब्जेक्ट को पढ़ने के लिए. अगर आपको कोई भी ज़रूरत नहीं है सब्जेक्ट को पढ़ने के लिए और आपको आता है, तो you have to answer a very few questions, a very few general questions which I am going to ask you, and if you are able to give answer in your mind, so I will be happy not to teach you. And if you are not able to answer even a single simple question, then you will come to know the importance of studying industrial law. So students, these are the few simple questions. एक इमोजी कंफ्यूजन सा क्रिएट करता हुआ, बट आई एम श्योर कि आप नहीं होंगे. So my questions are, my first question is to you: what is the meaning of industry? What is the meaning of factory? पावर किसे कहते हैं? POWER, power किसे कहते हैं? And what do you understand about this word labor? And what do you think, which act will apply to a shop situated within the precincts of a factory, or a Factory Act, Shops and Establishment Act? What is the position of the employer who is unable to pay minimum wages fixed under the Act? Is a trade union an industry? In what way the industrial tribunals are different from the civil court? ये बहुत ही सिंपल क्वेश्चंस हैं, क्योंकि इससे कई ज़्यादा ट्रिकी क्वेश्चंस आपको गवर्नमेंट एग्ज़ाम्स में पूछे जाते हैं, आपके कॉलेज सिलेबस से पूछे जाते हैं, यूनिवर्सिटी एग्ज़ाम्स में पूछे जाते हैं. एंड ये तो बहुत ही सरल क्वेश्चन है. कैन सुपरवाइजरी ऑफिसर्स एंड मैनेजर्स फ्रॉम अ ट्रेड यूनियन or can union change its name? So my dear students, how many of you know the answer of these simple questions? What is the meaning of industrial tribunal? What is Factories Act? What is Establishment Act? सुपरवाइजरी ऑफिसर्स की ड्यूटीज क्या होती हैं? क्या सुपरवाइजरी ऑफिसर्स मैनेजर्स से डिफरेंट होते हैं? ट्रेड यूनियन सिर्फ इंडस्ट्री में होती है या और कहीं भी? और ये क्या है? मिनिमम फिक्स्ड वेजेस, इसको क्या कह सकते हैं? ये तो बहुत ही सिंपल से क्वेश्चंस हैं. आर यू एबल टू आंसर दीज क्वेश्चंस? ओके, सो आई थिंक मैं 100% तो नहीं कह सकती, लेकिन हाँ, कुछ को इसमें से कुछ क्वेश्चंस के जवाब आते होंगे जो हम आपसे लाइव क्लासेस में पूछेंगे, और जिनको नहीं आते हैं उनका परसेंटेज कुछ ज़्यादा है. तो अब आपको ये पता चल गया होगा that why we should study industrial law. Students, industrial law is also a very important law because in a you know this economy is based upon labors. ये जो फैक्ट्री है जिसमें से काला धुआं निकल रहा है, इसको चलाते हैं वर्कर्स. इसको इंडिया में या किसी भी कंट्री में उसकी जीडीपी से ही उस कंट्री की ग्रोथ को नापा जाता है. इसलिए it is very important to know about this law. लॉ की इम्पोर्टेंस आपने फर्स्ट ईयर में भी पढ़ी थी when you study about the business law. इसके बाद सेकेंड ईयर में आप इंडस्ट्रियल लॉ और कंपनी लॉ के बारे में पढ़ेंगे. For being a commerce student, it is very important because you are the people who will become an entrepreneur. And for being entrepreneur, it is very important to know what are the duties of an entrepreneur regarding with workers, laborers, factories, trade unions, and so on. So student, welcome to your first lecture of the industrial law. Students, industrial law is from group B, paper 6th, and the purpose of this paper is to orient students about the industrial rules and regulations. Unit 1 is about the Factories Act, in which we study about the importance, definition, provision of the Factories Act relating of health, safety and welfare of the workers, working hours of adults and young persons. Unit 2nd is about the Industrial Dispute Act, meaning of industrial dispute, authorities under the Industrial Dispute Act, their duties and rights, strike and lockouts, layoff and retrenchment. Unit 3rd, Indian Trade Union Act, definition and registration of the trade unions, rights and liabilities of the registered trade unions. Unit 4th is about Employees State Insurance Act, in which we will study about the constitution and functions of Employees State Insurance Corporation, Standing Committee and Medical Benefit Council, provision relating to contribution and benefits. Unit 5th, Workmen Compensation Act, a brief study of the provision to compensation of workmen. Unit 6th, Minimum Wages Act and Payment of Wages Act. importance, definition, and brief study of the provisions. Now, first unit, the Factories Act, in which we'll study about the importance of the Factories Act, definitions, provisions of the Factories Act relating of health, safety and welfare of the workers, working hours of adults and young persons. The main objective of this act is not only to ensure adequate safety measures but also to promote health and welfare of the workers employed in factories, as well as to prevent haphazard growth of factories and annual leave, and enact special provision in respect of young person, women and children who work in the factories. The term industrial law or labor law is used to denote those laws which are passed to regulate the working conditions and industrial relations in factories, mines, plantations, and other establishments. For example, provisions regarding hours of work, leave with wages, health, safety and welfare of workers, registration of trade unions, payment of wages, payment of compensation to workers in the case of death or accident arising out of employment, etc., are all covered under this labor law. The scope of this term industrial law is wider. In a narrow sense, the term industrial law is used only for those laws which affect labours only. In a wider sense, the term industrial law not only covers law which affect labor but also laws concerned with economic matters, taxation and corporate management such as Companies Act 1956, the Industrial Development Regulation Act 1957, the Income Tax Act 1961, etc. Therefore, it is in its narrow sense that the word industrial law is used as a synonym with the word labor law. The unprecedented mushroom growth of industry left much to be desired. It left behind a trail of woes and human miseries. Horrible working conditions, extremely long working hours, very poor wages, complete insecurity of employment, and risk of injury were some of the important causes which led the development of the industrial legislation. In case of death and accident during employment, a worker could not get compensation as he had voluntarily agreed to bear the risk of employment injury in industry. To compensate the workers for injuries or death arising out of accidents, the Employee Compensation Act was passed. In course of time, the workers formed trade unions to protect themselves. However, these trade unions were considered antisocial. A strike by the workers in Buckingham and Karnataka Mill was declared void, and the workers were sued for breach of contract. The government therefore passed a legislation to provide for the registration of the Trade Union Act. In modern times, the role of the government is not only confined to the protection of citizens against foreign aggressions and maintenance of internal peace and order, but also to maximization of the welfare of its citizens and in a particular of the weaker section of the society. Needless to emphasize that this weaker section consists mostly the working class. Hence, the term industrial legislation or labor legislation has also came to known by the name of social legislation. The state is committed to protect the workers against the exploitation, social or economic, to secure them their due share in the gains of economic development, The labor laws are not only the technical rules designed to solve disputes between the management and the workers, but are also the instruments of social engineering. Their functions is to create a proper social adjustment, a balance between the competing claims and interest in the society. The objective of the labor legislation is to regulate working conditions so as to preserve the health, safety, and welfare of the workers and check their exploitation. And number second, to promote industrial peace for increased production and productivity. Brief history of the Factories Act 1948. The history of factory legislation in India starts with the rise of large-scale industries in the latter half of the 19th century. But prior to 1881, when the first Factory Act was passed, the policy of the state towards matter concerning labor was virtually one of laissez-faire. Hours of work is the most of the factories were from sunrise to sunset. Large number of women and children were employed. There was no provision for weekly holidays. Despite these conditions, various industrially advanced states and public opinions did not favor any form of legislation. This reflects the lack of concern among the public for the conditions of the industrial workers. The first Factory Act was passed in 1881. If a regular rest interval of half an hour in the middle of the day and weekly day of rest to all workers in factories. The act was amended in 1911. The working hours for male workers were limited to 12 in a day with a rest interval of 1 hour. The hours of work of child laborers were reduced to 6 with a rest interval of an hour, and the children were prohibited from working in night shifts. The Act also contained provisions for health and safety of child labor. These amendments fell short of improvements in minimum standards recommended by the 1908 Labour Commission 42 Factories Act of 1934, overhauled in the Act of 1911 with a view to implementing the recommendations of the Royal Commission of Labour of India 1931. The Act reduced the hours of work for children to 5 days and provided for rest, shelter, and crèches. A new Act consolidate and amend by the law relating to labour in factories was passed by a Constituent Assembly on 28 August 1948, and it came into force on 1st April 1949. The Factories Act 1948 covered all factories employing 10 or more workers where power was used and 20 or more workers where power was not used.